there's a particular kind of fear that only shows up in places that are supposed to be quiet. Not haunted house fear. Not jump scare fear. I mean that slow, skin-prickly dread when you're stabbed, just a subtle dropout, like the building is holding its breath. His hand reaches out, and for a second, you see his fingers hesitate. That micro-hesitation matters. The actor makes it matter. When something ancient chooses him, it doesn't feel random. Always prefer when a supernatural show lets mystery stay messy. History is messy. Secrets are messy. If everything gets clarified too quickly, you lose the delicious discomfort. But I'm not calling it a flaw yet, it's more like a pressure point I'm watching. And Sam's accidental statue repair? That's such a smart inciting incident because it's mundane. It's not a grand ritual. It's not, I read the forbidden spell out loud because I'm curious. It's a working guy doing a working guy thing, fixing something, taking initiative, trying to do his job well. That makes the consequences feel cruel in a specific way. He didn't go looking for trouble. Trouble got activated by competence. Which is, honestly, thematically brutal. Like, imagine being punished by fate for being useful. There's a tiny detail, more of a vibe, really, that's the kind that gets under my skin. And the last thing I'll say for now is this, the drama's biggest early strength is restraint, but restraint is also a promise. It's telling you, stick with me, and I'll pay this off. The museum is whispering. The artifacts are humming under the glass. Sam is pretending he's fine. And if you listen closely, the whole story is already hinting that the city outside those walls is not as safe or as ordinary as it thinks. Because what happens when the thing you're guarding stops being an object, and starts being a doorway? When your night shift turns into a front line? When the power that chose you starts asking for more than you can give? The show begins nudging toward that edge, and the way it nudges, slow, deliberate, almost gentle, is exactly why I'm locked in. And right as the early episodes settle into that rhythm, you can feel the narrative start to widen. Sam's job stops being just a location, and becomes a responsibility that follows him even when he's not on the museum floor, and the way the camera starts framing him outside those walls makes it feel like the city itself is about to become part of the museum's collection, like he's carrying the building's shadow with him into the streets, into normal life, into the places that are supposed to be safe. And that's where the drama starts doing something really interesting with how it treats secret identity, not like a fun double life, but like a kind of isolation that can rot you from the inside if you don't have someone to ground you, which brings me to the way the show begins setting up the people around Sam and how that pressure tests him in ways the monsters can't. Which brings me to the way the show begins setting up the people around Sam and how that pressure tests him in ways the monsters can't. Because the first trap of a secret hero story is always the same. You think the danger is out there in the dark, but the real threat is that you start living like a liar. And Satpam Museum Dengan Kekuatan Rahasia is weirdly good at capturing the mundane suffocation of that. Early on, you get this sense that Sam's life is made of small conversations and quick exchanges. A supervisor who cares more about protocol than people. A coworker who's friendly in that casual, low-commitment way that night shift workers do, because everyone's tired and nobody wants to emotionally adopt each other. A museum staff presence that's polite but distant, like Sam is part of the building's security system rather than a human being with a pulse. The show doesn't need to overwrite these characters for you to feel the social geometry. Sam is always slightly outside the circle. He's allowed into the space, but he's not really invited into it. And that outsider status matters once the power kicks in, because he can't even do the normal thing where you look at someone and go, hey, something happened and I need help. He's stuck with this terrifying combination of responsibility and anonymity. People talk about the burden of the hero like it's dramatic poetry, but this drama frames it like a workplace problem. How do you do your job when the job has become impossible to describe? How do you file an incident report that says, "Artifact tried to kill me"? You don't. You swallow it. You keep walking your rounds. You smile at the camera you know is watching you and hope your face doesn't give away that your reality just cracked. Here's the thing I didn't expect, the show makes secrecy feel less like a trope and more like a symptom. Like Sam isn't hiding because he wants to be mysterious. He's hiding because saying it out loud might make it real, and if it's real, then everything changes. If you've ever carried something heavy by yourself, not because you're noble, but because you don't want to be a burden, you'll recognize that energy immediately. And the drama's pacing, at least in this middle stretch, plays into that psychological claustrophobia. It doesn't sprint from set piece to set piece. It alternates between stretches of uneasy normality and sudden moments where the supernatural presses its face against the glass. That rhythm can frustrate people who want constant fireworks, but for me it's what makes the world believable. Because if you're Sam, your life doesn't become an action montage. Your life becomes a series of, is tonight going to be quiet, and please let tonight be quiet, and then the inevitable, it's not quiet. Let me pull you into one of the early standout sequences, still light spoilers, don't worry, because it's the kind of scene that tells you exactly what show you're watching. Sam is doing a standard patrol, just the repetitive loop, and the camera is placed slightly behind him, not quite over the shoulder, like we're trailing him but keeping our distance. The only consistent sound is the soft squeak of his shoes and the faint buzz of old lights. Then you hear it, a thin, almost delicate tapping. Not a bang. Not a roar. A tap. 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 It's coming from somewhere you can't immediately locate, and the show is evil enough to not tell you where. Sam pauses. His shoulders tighten. He turns his flashlight slowly, and the beam slides across glass cases like a pale hand. You see his reflection multiply, him, fractured across panels, and in that moment you feel how easily a person can get lost in a place made to display things. His breathing gets a little louder in the mix. Just a little. And then the tapping stops. That's the worst part, right? When the sound stops and you realize it heard you react. Sam stands there, eyes fixed on a corner that's too dark, and you can see him deciding whether to be brave or to be employed. That tiny choice is the whole show in miniature. So when people ask me, is it scary? I don't think it's wall-to-wall horror, but it absolutely understands suspense. It treats silence like a weapon. It treats empty space like a threat. And it treats Sam's body language like dialogue. That's craft. Now, let's talk about the power itself without turning this into a mythology lecture. The show is smart in how it doles out information. You don't get a neat rulebook right away. You get symptoms. You get consequences. You get moments where Sam realizes something about himself a half-second too late. That gradual unfolding makes the power feel ancient. Because ancient things don't explain themselves. They just are, and you either adapt or break. But I'll be honest, the show also flirts with the danger of being too coy. There were a couple scenes where I could feel the writers holding back so hard that it started to look like stalling. Like, yes, mystery is delicious, but you still need forward motion. Here's another rehook. What happens when Sam realizes the museum's threats aren't random? That there's intention behind what's waking up. The drama starts hinting at patterns, and once you sense pattern, you start watching differently. You stop scanning scenes for moments and start scanning for meaning. That's when a story gets addictive. Something else I appreciated is how the show treats heroism to collapse as the show goes on, and you can feel the writing preparing for that. It's like watching storm clouds gather. It's the humor of a person who has to keep functioning while his world gets weird. That kind of humor doesn't ruin fear, it sharpens it, because it highlights how absurd and unfair the situation is. At the same time, the show doesn't let you relax for too long. Even in quieter scenes, there's a sense of unease. The score might carry a faint dissonance. The camera might hold a shot a beat too long. The museum might be absent physically, but present psychologically. You start to feel like Sam can't fully be anywhere else anymore. Like he's always half listening for that tapping sound, half expecting the air to shift. One critique I do have is that sometimes the show leans a little too hard into mysterious glances, instead of letting scenes breathe with actual conversation. There are a few exchanges where you can tell a character knows more than they are saying, and instead of giving us a charged, human confrontation, the scene ends with a look. And I get why. It's suspense. But suspense built on withholding can get repetitive if it becomes the default. The strongest suspense comes when people speak honestly and it still doesn't solve the problem. I'm hoping the show keeps moving toward that, because when it does give Sam a real verbal clash, where he demands answers or refuses a directive, it's electric. And I want to circle back to the museum as metaphor, because it's doing a lot of thematic work. Museums are about preservation, but they are also about control. Someone decides what gets displayed, what gets labeled, what gets archived, what gets hidden. In this drama, the secret hidden for hundreds of years isn't just a spooky plot device. It feels like a question about who gets to bury truth and who pays for that burial later. Sam, the guard, is the one dealing with the consequences of decisions made by people long dead. That's depressingly realistic, actually. There's also an ethical tension simmering. If these artifacts are dangerous, should they even be kept? If they are powerful, who has the right to lock them away? The show doesn't preach, but it invites those questions by making the artifacts feel less like evil objects and more like contained forces. Like nature in a cage. And nature doesn't like cages. If you're still with me, here's what I think the drama is quietly best at, making the supernatural feel like an extension of human history rather than a random fantasy overlay. The threats aren't just monsters. They are echoes. They are consequences. They are what happens when you treat history like a collection instead of a living thing. That's why the museum setting isn't just aesthetic, it's essential. Now, as the story pushes forward, you can feel Sam's arc tilting from survival toward purpose. Not cleanly, not with a triumphant anthem, but with reluctant competence. He starts anticipating danger. He starts reading the museum differently. He starts treating objects with a respect that isn't reverence, it's caution. And there's a sadness in that, because it means he's losing innocence. The museum is teaching him a language of threat. This is also where I really want to highlight the show's use of camera movement. Early on, the camera is often steady, observant, like the museum itself is watching. As Sam becomes more entangled, you get more handheld energy in moments of stress, but it's controlled handheld, not shaky for the sake of shaky. The movement feels like adrenaline. The lens choices sometimes widen in the museum to exaggerate space, making Sam look swallowed, and then tighten in moments where the power asserts itself, like the world is closing in. That kind of visual grammar is storytelling. And the music, when it chooses to be melodic, tends to be restrained, almost mournful. Not heroic. Not bombastic. It's like the score is grieving something. Which makes sense if the show's worldview is that power comes with loss. Here's a small, self-aware aside. I watched some of these episodes late at night, which is absolutely the worst way to watch a museum horror drama, because then you finish an episode and your own living room feels like it has corners you didn't notice before. So if I sound a little intense, blame my own choices. I did this to myself. Another rehook before we go deeper. What does it mean that Sam gets power by repairing something broken? That's not just a plot trigger, that's a theme. Repair. Restoration. Preservation. The show keeps echoing that idea in different forms, and once you notice it, you start seeing the entire narrative as a question: can you fix the past without waking what it buried? And that's where the drama starts to get emotionally tricky. Because Sam is a fixer by nature. He takes the job for money, sure, but he also takes it seriously. He doesn't slack. He doesn't shrug off responsibility. So when he's given a power that responds to repair, again, speaking generally, he's being pulled into his own personality flaw, the need to fix everything. And that can be heroic, but it can also be self-destructive. The show is at its best when it lets those two truths coexist. I also want to mention the way the show handles the city stakes without turning into a disaster movie. The premise says the city is threatened by deadly forces emerging from ancient artifacts, but the drama smartly keeps the consequences personal first. You feel the city as a looming responsibility rather than a constant spectacle of chaos. That keeps the budget from becoming the story, and it keeps the narrative from losing its intimacy. When it hints at danger beyond the museum, it does it like a ripple spreading, not like an explosion every episode. Now, for newcomers especially, you might be wondering if this is going to turn into a straightforward superhero thing. Capes, battles, secret lairs. And I can't fully answer that without stepping into spoiler territory, but what I can say is that the show's heart is not, look how strong he is. The heart is, look how alone he is. Even when the story expands, it keeps returning to that loneliness as the core cost. If the show ever forgets that and turns Sam into a quipping action figure, it'll lose what makes it distinct. But so far, it seems determined not to. The drama's tension also comes from how Sam's power complicates his morality. When you're the only one who can stop something, you start making decisions that nobody can check. That's scary. The show hints at that ethical isolation. It's not just, can he win? It's, can he stay himself? And that's the more interesting question. If I had to pinpoint the moment where the show really clicked for me, it was when I realized I wasn't watching to see what artifact would wake up next. I was watching to see what Sam would do when nobody was watching. Because that's where character lives. And the show keeps putting him in those little moral corners. Do you report this? Do you hide it? Do you protect the museum's reputation or protect people? Do you follow protocol or follow instinct? Those choices are more gripping than any glowing effect. There's a particular shot language the show uses whenever Sam is about to make a choice. The frame often holds him slightly off-center. Not perfectly composed. Slightly wrong. And that offness mirrors his internal imbalance. It's like the show is visually saying, this guy is not aligned with his life anymore. I love when a drama does that, when cinematography isn't just pretty, it's psychological. One more critique, because I'm not here to pretend it's flawless, occasionally the show's dialogue can feel like it's translating an idea rather than embodying it. Like a line will land a little too neatly, a little too, theme statement, and it bumps you out of the scene for a second. The fix is simple, trust the silence. This show is already good at silence. It should lean on it even more. When you have an actor who can communicate with a look, you don't need to put the idea in words every time. But even with those bumps, the overall experience is strong because it has personality. It has a point of view. It's not content to be just a spooky power fantasy. It wants to be about labor, history, invisibility, and the cost of being the person who stands guard while everyone else sleeps. And as we move further into the narrative, you can feel the threats becoming less episodic and more connected, like separate anomalies are starting to rhyme with each other, and Sam, who began as a guy just trying to make rent, starts acting like someone who's building an internal map of the museum's rules, even if he'd never admit it out loud, and that's where the show starts teasing a bigger confrontation not just with whatever is waking up, but with the idea of the museum itself as an institution that has been keeping secrets for a very long time, because once Sam suspects that the danger isn't an accident, that it's curated, in a way, then every locked door stops feeling like security and starts feeling like concealment, and that shift in how he looks at the building is the moment his hero story turns into something more like a rebellion, which is exactly where my brain starts spiraling about what the drama is really trying to say and why the next stretch feels like it's going to test him in ways that aren't solved by strength but by choice, by who he trusts, by whether he's willing to become the kind of person who breaks rules for the right reasons, and the show starts planting that tension in the smallest interactions, the kind you almost miss if you're only watching for the supernatural, because the show is quietly obsessed with something more human than monsters, power structures. Not just magical power. Institutional power. Who gets access? Who gets told the truth? Who gets to keep things, for the public good, while privately deciding what the public can handle? And once that starts coming into focus, the museum stops being spooky wallpaper and becomes political. In a good way. In a way that makes the story feel like it has teeth beyond the artifact of the weak thrills. What I love about the way the drama handles Sam's growing suspicion is that it doesn't turn him into Sherlock overnight. He doesn't suddenly become a law master with perfect instincts. He stays a working guy. He notices inconsistencies the way a guard would notice them, patterns in who shows up after hours, which doors are suddenly off limits, which cameras malfunction at the wrong times, how the building's rules always seem to shift when someone higher up says so. That's grounded storytelling. That's a character learning the truth in the language he actually speaks. And there's something deliciously unsettling about watching someone realize the place they're protecting might be the thing endangering everyone else. It's like being hired to babysit a kid and then slowly realizing the kid isn't the problem, the house is. The house has a history. The house has secrets. The house is hungry. And you're standing there with a flashlight and a radio like that's supposed to matter. Here's the angle that made me lean forward in my seat. Sam's power isn't just something he uses on threats. It changes how he experiences space. You can feel the show shifting his perception, even when nothing big is happening. He starts pausing at certain rooms like his body remembers something his mind hasn't learned yet. The camera starts treating certain artifacts with a more loaded gaze, like we're being trained alongside him. Even the way scenes are blocked changes. Sam doesn't walk through the museum like it's neutral territory anymore. He starts moving like a person in enemy land. That's not exposition. That's staging doing character work. And because we're staying light on spoilers, I'm not going to spell out what the secret hidden for hundreds of years specifically is, or how the show eventually reframes it. But I can talk about how it feels when the story starts circling its deeper truth. The writing begins leaving breadcrumbs that aren't just lore, they are moral questions. You start hearing the same ideas echoed in different contexts: preservation versus imprisonment, restoration versus exploitation, protection versus ownership. The drama gets more confident the more it lets those tensions breathe. There's a specific type of dread this show taps into that I don't see often, the dread of being the only person who knows something is wrong, in a world that's committed to acting normal. Like, sure, the artifacts can be deadly, but the bigger anxiety is realizing that if you speak up, you become the problem. You become the unstable one. The drama plays with that social horror in a way that feels painfully real. Sam's not just fighting supernatural forces, he's fighting the human reflex to deny anything inconvenient. And can I be honest? Watching Sam navigate that made me weirdly angry at times. Not at him. At the situation. Because it hits that nerve of, the people who do the least dangerous work often have the most authority to decide how danger gets handled. Sam's there on the floor with the threat. Other people are somewhere else, behind policies, behind reputations, behind we can't alarm the public. And Sam's stuck carrying the consequences. That's a tension you can feel building even when nobody says it out loud. The show's restraint continues to be its best flex. It doesn't constantly show you the city in chaos to convince you the stakes are real. It shows you Sam's sleep deteriorating. It shows you the way his attention fractures. It shows you how he starts scanning normal spaces like they're exhibit rooms. Like he's turning everything into a potential display case for danger. And that's what makes the only he can protect the city line land emotionally. Because he's not being celebrated for protecting it. He's being consumed by it. Every few episodes, the show gives you a moment that feels like a deep inhale before another plunge. A quieter scene where Sam is alone, sometimes in the museum, sometimes not, and you can tell he's trying to remember what his life felt like before. Those scenes are where the actor really shines. He'll sit there with his jaw clenched, eyes unfocused, like he's listening to something far away. And you realize he's not listening for a sound in the room. He's listening for the absence of sound. He's listening for peace. And let me throw a question at you that the show keeps poking: if you gain power and nobody knows, is it still heroism, or is it just survival with extra steps? Because there's a point where Sam's actions can be read two ways. Either he's noble, quietly choosing the city over himself, or he's trapped, doing what he has to do because the alternative is worse. The drama is smart enough to leave that ambiguous, and I think that's why it feels more adult than a lot of secret protector stories. Visually, the show starts expanding its palette without losing its identity. Early episodes are all about dim corridors and glass reflections. As the story grows, you start getting more contrast, daylight scenes that should feel relieving but don't, because Sam brings the museum's tension with him. The lighting might be brighter, but the framing keeps him boxed. You'll see him in wider public spaces and still feel like he's trapped. That's a great bit of visual irony. The world gets bigger, but his freedom gets smaller. There's a mid-story shift in how threats present themselves. Again, I'm not going to spoil specifics, but the feeling changes from "the museum contains danger" to "the museum leaks danger." That's a big tonal step. And the show handles it with a change in rhythm. The editing gets a little more urgent. The soundscape starts layering in outside world noises, traffic, voices, city ambience, under the museum's hum, like two realities are blending. That kind of sonic layering is not accidental. It's the show telling you, the boundary is thinning. If you're new to dramas like this, that's the point where you realize you're not watching a closed-room story anymore. You're watching a ripple effect. And that's when the premise starts feeling less like a fun hook and more like a responsibility narrative. The city becomes a weight on Sam's back even in scenes where the city isn't physically present. Here's a little thing I noticed that made me respect the direction. The show keeps using glass as a motif. Not just because museums have glass, but because glass is about separation. You can see the thing, but you can't touch it. You can be inches away, but there's a barrier. Sam is constantly on the wrong side of barriers, social barriers, institutional barriers, psychological barriers. And as his power grows, he becomes a barrier himself between the city and whatever is waking up. That's poetic without being pretentious. That's a visual metaphor you can feel. Now, I want to talk about pacing, because this is where "loved it" doesn't mean it's perfect. There are a couple stretches where the show's slow burn confidence turns into a slightly saggy middle for some viewers. I didn't fully mind it because I like mood, but I can't deny there are moments where you're waiting for the next meaningful escalation and the episode is more about simmering than moving. The reason I stayed on board is because the simmering isn't empty, it's character pressure. Sam's inner life is changing even when the plot isn't sprinting. But if you're the kind of viewer who needs each episode to feel like a self-contained rollercoaster, I can see you getting impatient. This is not that. This is a show that wants you to sit in discomfort and watch a person get slowly rewired by responsibility. There's also a choice the writers make that I think is brave. They don't let Sam become socially smooth just because he's powerful now. He doesn't suddenly have the charisma of a leader. If anything, he gets more awkward in normal interactions, because he's carrying too much. And that makes him more believable. Power doesn't automatically make you confident, sometimes it makes you hypervigilant. Sometimes it makes you weird. One of my favorite bits of performance is how Sam's voice changes in stressful moments. Not louder. Not more dramatic. It gets flatter. Like he's trying to keep his tone from revealing how scared he is. That flatness is such a real fear response. Your body goes into "be normal" mode. The actor nails that. He'll say a line that, on paper, could be forgettable, but the way he says it, tight throat, measured breath, turns it into a lie you can hear. And when the show gives him moments of anger, it's not heroic anger. It's worker anger. It's the anger of someone who's being asked to do too much with too little support. That's the most relatable kind of rage. The kind that doesn't come from ego, but from exhaustion. Here's another re-hook that kept me thinking between episodes. What if Sam isn't the first person the museum ever chose? The storyline tells us the secret has been hidden for hundreds of years. The drama plays with the implication of legacy, of cycles, without having to spell it out early. And once that thought enters your head, you start watching like a detective. You start looking for echoes. For patterns. For hints that the museum has done this before, to someone else, and the reason nobody knows the hero is because heroes don't last. That's a terrifying possibility. The show's handling of the "nobody knows he's the hero" element is also refreshingly not self-congratulatory. It doesn't romanticize martyrdom. It shows the cost. There's a quiet heartbreak to watching Sam do something dangerous and then immediately have to return to being dismissed. He doesn't get a "thank you." He gets suspicion. He gets bureaucracy. He gets the indignity of being treated like staff even after he's prevented something catastrophic. And if that doesn't make you feel something, I don't know what to tell you. That's the kind of emotional friction that makes a drama linger. Now, let's get into the craft of tension escalation, because this is where the show is quietly excellent. A lot of supernatural dramas escalate by getting louder, bigger monsters, bigger explosions, bigger music. This one escalates by narrowing Sam's options. That's more effective. The threats become scarier not because they are visually bigger, but because Sam has fewer safe choices. He can't call for help. He can't explain. He can't leave. He can't always fight. He has to think. He has to endure. And endurance is a different kind of suspense than combat. The museum's geography becomes more complex the more you learn it. Early on, it's a maze. Later, it's a map. The show starts using repeated locations with altered meaning, which is a classic horror trick. Take a familiar hallway and make it feel wrong. A door that used to be just a door becomes a boundary. You're afraid of the known turning against you. There's another miniscene I have to describe because it's such a good example of the show's sensory storytelling, and it still stays within light spoiler territory because it's more about vibe than plot. Sam is in a room with multiple artifacts, and the camera is positioned low, near waist height, so the glass cases tower slightly, like sentinels. The air feels colder. You can see a faint fog of his breath, or maybe it's just the lighting making it look that way. The sound drops out except for a thin tone that could be electrical interference. Sam slowly turns his head, not his whole body, like he's trying not to provoke anything. His eyes flick to a particular object, doesn't matter which, and you see his pupils tighten. The tiniest flinch. Then the show cuts to a wide shot where he's suddenly very small in the frame, and you realize the real horror isn't one artifact. It's the room. It's the fact that he's surrounded by history that can hurt him. It's like being locked in a room full of loaded weapons that might fire on their own. That scene lands emotionally because it captures helplessness without needing a monster to jump out. If you're watching for thrills, yes, the show delivers moments of danger. But if you're watching for a mood that crawls under your skin, it's these quiet sequences that do the damage. Now, I want to talk about the show's subtext around masculinity and vulnerability. Because Sam is not written as the typical power fantasy guy. He's not emotionally articulate in a polished way. He doesn't have a supportive squad to debrief with. He doesn't have a mentor figure handing him wisdom in neatly packaged speeches, at least not in a way that feels like a superhero training arc. He's alone with his fear, and he tries to handle it the way a lot of people handle fear, by shutting up and pushing through. The drama doesn't present that as admirable. It presents it as dangerous. There's a sadness in watching him try to swallow everything. And the show keeps giving him opportunities, small ones, to reach for connection, and you can feel him resist. Not because he doesn't want people, but because he's terrified that if he lets someone close, they'll get hurt. Or they'll think he's insane. Or they'll look at him differently. The show captures that particular kind of loneliness where you're protecting others from your truth, and you're also protecting yourself from their reaction. And yeah, that hit me. Because I've been that person in smaller ways. Not ancient artifact power ways, obviously. But the instinct to keep your problems inside because you don't want to be the person who ruins the vibe. That's a real human instinct. Watching Sam do it in extreme circumstances makes it feel both dramatic and painfully familiar. Here's a contrarian take that I stand by. I don't think the drama is really about Sam saving the city. I think it's about Sam learning that he deserves to be saved too. The city is the external stake. Sam's humanity is the internal one. If the show ends up treating him like a disposable tool for plot, it'll fail. But if it keeps treating him like a person whose well-being matters, then the city-saving stuff becomes a metaphor for self-preservation. And the way it's written so far, it feels like it's leaning toward that second, more compassionate interpretation. The artifact threats, when they appear, also feel less like villains, and more like symptoms of imbalance. The show doesn't always frame them as purely evil, it frames them as forces that were contained for a reason, and now containment is failing. That distinction matters because it makes the story feel less like, punch the bad guy, and more like, fix the system. Which loops back to the repair motif. Sam repaired a statue and got power. Now he's trying to repair a broken boundary between past and present, between hidden and exposed, between controlled and unleashed. And that's where the museum's role becomes morally complicated. Museums preserve, but they also take. They display, but they also remove objects from context. If the drama is smart, and it seems to be, it will keep complicating the idea that locking something behind glass is the same as protecting it. Sometimes glass is a cage. Sometimes glass is denial. You can see the show's writers wrestling with that, because whenever the story brushes up against the idea of public safety, it also brushes up against secrecy. And secrecy is never neutral. Someone benefits. Someone always benefits. Now, about the title itself, Satpam Museum Dengan Kekuatan Rahasia, there's almost a cheeky simplicity to it, and I think that actually helps the show. It's not about a job. About power showing up in the hands of someone who isn't part of the elite. That framing matters. If the protagonist were a professor, a curator, a chosen scholar, the whole story would feel like an academic fantasy. Sam being a guard makes it feel like a labor fantasy with horror seasoning. And that's fresher. The cinematography continues to reinforce that class perspective. We spend time at eye level with Sam, not looking down from lofty angles. Even when the museum looks grand, it's shot in ways that emphasize the parts Sam deals with, the back corridors, the security rooms, the staff doors, the maintenance vibes. That's important because it keeps the story from becoming romantic tourism. This isn't, wow, look at this beautiful museum. It's, wow, look at this workplace that could kill you. Another rehook, because this is where the show starts messing with your head. If Sam is the only one who can protect the city, is that because he's special, or because everyone else has been deliberately kept powerless? The difference between those two ideas is massive. One is destiny. The other is design. And the show flirts with that tension in a way that makes you suspicious of every official explanation. Let's talk about how the show uses cameras, too, because that's such a perfect element for a security guard story. Surveillance is already creepy. It's watching without being seen. The drama uses CCTV feeds not just as plot tools, but as mood. Grainy footage. Delayed movements. The uncanny feeling of seeing a space from an inhuman angle. And it also plays into Sam's paranoia. If the museum is watching him, who else is watching him? What gets recorded? What disappears? Those are questions the show plants through visual language rather than dialogue, and I love that. There's also a subtle irony in the idea that Sam's job is literally to observe, but the biggest truth is hidden from him. Observation without access. Surveillance without understanding. That's a very modern anxiety, and the show makes it feel ancient too. Performance-wise, I want to give credit to the way the actor physicalizes carrying something. His posture changes across episodes. Not in a dramatic, instantly noticeable way, but in a slow collapse. His shoulders get a fraction tighter. His neck looks like it's holding weight. Even when he's standing still, he looks like he's braced for impact. That's the kind of detail that makes you believe time has passed, that nights have stacked up, that sleep has been stolen. And because I'm a drama reviewer with opinions, I'm going to say something that might sound nitpicky but actually matters. The show's emotional beats work best when it stays quiet. When it tries to punch a moment with a bigger music cue or a more dramatic line, it sometimes weakens what's already there. This is a story that thrives on understatement. The museum is not a loud villain. It's a slow force. The more the show trusts that, the scarier and more moving it becomes. Now, as the narrative moves deeper, the show starts introducing the idea that Sam's power comes with a price beyond exhaustion. Not just, you might get hurt. I mean a price that touches identity. The drama implies, through behavior, through tone, that power changes you. It makes you a little less normal, a little less anchored. And that's a fascinating direction because it means Sam's biggest enemy might not be an artifact. It might be the gradual erosion of who he is when nobody is asking him to be a hero. That's where the show's secret hero angle becomes tragic rather than cool. If no one knows you're the hero, you also don't get the social reinforcement that helps you stay sane. You don't get people checking you. You don't get a community holding you accountable. You don't get a friend saying, hey, you're not okay. You just keep going, and the line between duty and obsession starts to blur. And the show does this clever thing where it makes the museum feel like a jealous relationship. The more Sam tries to live normally, the more the museum asserts itself. Again, not necessarily literally every time, but emotionally. The museum keeps pulling him back. It keeps demanding his attention. It keeps making normal life feel like an illusion. And if you've ever had a job that swallowed you, this metaphor hits hard. That's why I keep calling the museum a toxic boss. It's not just a joke. It's a reading. Here's my lightly humorous aside, because I need to breathe. If someone offered me a huge salary to guard a museum at night, after watching this drama, I'm sorry, I'm becoming unemployed. I am choosing poverty and peace. I will be poor and alive. Thank you. The show's themes also start to intertwine in a way that feels intentional. Repair becomes not just physical repair but moral repair. Preservation becomes not just saving objects but deciding what should be saved. Protection becomes not just guarding a building but guarding a city that doesn't know it's vulnerable. And secrecy becomes both armor and poison. That's a rich thematic stew, and it's why the drama feels more substantial than its straightforward premise suggests. Now, let's talk about the way it handles stakes without revealing endgame. The tension escalates by making the consequences more public, even if Sam remains hidden. You start to feel the city's pulse more. The show hints at ripple effects, unusual incidents, subtle panic, the sense that something is off in the wider world. And Sam, still stuck in the shadows, has to carry the burden of being both the cause, in a cosmic sense, and the solution. That's a brutal position for a character to be in, and it keeps the story emotionally charged. The writing also starts playing with the idea of legacy. Not just ancient legacy, but personal legacy. What does Sam's life become if this is his path now? What happens to his future plans? His relationships? His ability to be ordinary? The show doesn't need to show you a big romantic subplot or a family melodrama to make you feel that loss. It's in the way Sam looks at normal life like it's behind glass now. Like he can see it, but he can't touch it. Another rehook that matters, the premise says nobody knows who the hero is. But what happens if someone starts to suspect? Not the whole city finds out, but one person. One pair of eyes. One relationship that forces truth into the open. The drama starts teasing that possibility in a way that feels like a ticking clock, because the longer Sam hides, the more explosive any reveal becomes. Even if it's just emotional. Even if it's just a broken trust. And this is where I'll give the show major credit for emotional tension building. It's not just building toward an external confrontation. It's building toward interpersonal fractures. Because secrets don't just keep you safe. They also isolate you. They also make you unreliable to the people who care about you. If the show chooses to go there, and it feels like it will, that's where it can really hurt you in the best drama way. The museum, meanwhile, remains a masterpiece of atmosphere. The production design keeps offering little details that suggest a long, complicated past, worn labels, old fixtures, the way certain rooms feel older than others. The show's camera occasionally lingers on objects in a way that feels like foreshadowing, but it's not obnoxious. It's not screaming, "This is important." It's letting you feel important before you understand it. That's a rare discipline. And the sound continues to do the heavy lifting. The museum's sonic identity becomes recognizable. You start knowing when something is wrong because the room sounds different. The air shifts. The hum changes. It's like the museum has a mood, and the sound design communicates that mood before anything visually confirms it. That's sophisticated. I also want to talk about how the show handles fear without making Sam pathetic. He's scared, yes. He hesitates, yes. He doubts himself, yes. But he's never written as incompetent. He's written as overwhelmed. That's a crucial distinction. A lot of dramas force their protagonist to be dumb so the plot can happen. Here, Sam often makes reasonable choices in unreasonable circumstances, and the tension comes from the fact that reasonable choices still aren't enough. That's scarier, and it's more respectful to the character. There's also an underlying tenderness in the way the show treats Sam. Even as it tortures him, it doesn't mock him. It doesn't make him a punchline. It gives him dignity. When he's frightened, it's not played for cheap comedy. When he's tired, it's not romanticized. It's shown. And that tenderness is part of why I'm attached to him. Now, if you're a newcomer and you're wondering whether you need to be a mythology nerd to enjoy this, I don't think so. The show's hook is emotional and atmospheric first. The lore is seasoning. The core is a person being asked to hold back a tide with his bare hands. If that image does something to you, you'll be fine. What I will say is, the drama invites you to pay attention. It's not always loud about its clues. It's the kind of show where a small repeated sound can be meaningful. Where a lingering shot on an object can be a warning. Where a character's pause can be more revealing than their words. It's not puzzle box annoying, but it is layered. And I like that. It respects the viewer. There's a moment, not a specific plot twist, more like an emotional turning point, where Sam stops treating the power as an accident and starts treating it as a responsibility. You can feel that shift. His movements become more deliberate. His eyes become more searching. His fear doesn't vanish, but it becomes integrated. Like he's learned how to be afraid and still act. That's the birth of a hero, not in the flashy sense, but in the grown-up sense, doing the thing even when you don't feel brave. And yet, the show never lets you forget the cost. The secret part of secret heroism is not romantic here. It's corrosive. It eats at his life from the edges. It makes him late. It makes him distracted. It makes him unpredictable. And when you see him in normal settings, you realize how far he's drifting from everyone else. He's living in a different reality. That's compelling drama. Here's where I'm going to push one more time on the institutional theme, because it's the show's sharpest blade. Museums are about curated narratives. They tell stories through objects. They choose what to display and what to omit. This drama uses that idea to suggest that the secret hidden for hundreds of years isn't just hidden, it's curated. Someone decided that the public should see certain things and not others. Someone built a version of history that's safe to look at. And the dangerous truth was locked away. Sam stumbling into it isn't just an accident, it's an intrusion into a carefully controlled story. That's why the drama feels relevant. It's about who controls narratives. Who gets to decide what the world knows? Who pays when truth is buried? And it puts that burden on a guard, not a historian. That's a choice. It's saying, the people at the bottom of the hierarchy often end up dealing with the mess made by people at the top. Another rehook, because this is the thought that won't leave me alone, if the museum is hiding something for the city's safety, is it actually protecting the city, or protecting itself? Protecting its reputation. Protecting its power. Protecting the people who benefit from the secret. The show doesn't answer that quickly, and that's good, because it keeps you morally unsettled. The show also plays with anonymity in a way that feels modern. Sam is physically present but socially invisible. In a city full of cameras and constant observation, he's still unseen as a person. That's a bleak irony. And when he becomes the hero, he stays unseen. The city is protected by someone it would probably ignore in daylight. That's not just tragic. It's pointed. Now, I can feel you wanting me to get to the "so is it good" part, but I can't wrap anything up yet because there's still so much to chew on in the craft and the emotional trajectory, and honestly, this drama is the kind that rewards a longer conversation. So let me keep pulling threads. One of the smartest structural choices is that the show doesn't treat each artifact threat as purely random. Even when it's episodic, there's a sense of accumulation. Sam learns. The museum responds. The city's vulnerability increases. The stakes aren't reset at the end of each episode like a procedural. The tension stacks. That stacking is what makes binge watching feel compulsive, because you're not just watching events, you're watching consequences pile up. And the actor sells the accumulation. He gets that slightly haunted look that comes from too many nights of adrenaline. His reactions become faster, more automatic, like he's conditioning himself. That's realism. Trauma is repetitive. Fear becomes habit. The show captures that without turning it into misery porn. The only place I think the drama sometimes risks slipping is when it leans too hard into mysterious authority figures being vague. Vagueness can be intriguing once, twice. After a while, it becomes fog. The show is at its best when it replaces vagueness with tension. When characters clash. When someone refuses to answer and Sam pushes back. When silence becomes confrontation rather than avoidance. Those are the moments that crackle. And I'll say this, when Sam does push back, when he stops being purely reactive and starts asserting boundaries, emotionally, morally, you feel the story level up. Because that's the real arc. Not power escalation. Agency escalation. There's an interesting irony too. Sam gains power by repairing something, but the more he uses that power, the more broken his life becomes. That's the kind of thematic contradiction that makes a story feel like it's actually saying something. It's not just, be careful what you wish for, because he didn't wish for it. It's more like, be careful what you touch. Be careful what you take responsibility for. Because responsibility can be contagious. Another tiny craft detail, the show uses doors like punctuation. Doors closing too softly. Doors not latching properly. Doors that should be locked but aren't. It sounds simple, but it's such a primal fear trigger. Doors are boundaries. When boundaries fail, safety becomes imaginary. The show keeps finding ways to make door sounds, clicks, creaks, thuds, feel like heartbeats. If you're a sound nerd, you'll have a field day. And the museum's age is always present. This isn't a sleek modern gallery. This is a place that feels like it's been breathing for a long time. The show's color grading emphasizes that. It's not glossy. It's slightly muted, slightly worn. Like an old photograph that still holds violence in it. That aesthetic choice supports the theme, history is not dead. It's just quiet until it isn't. I also want to shout out the editing in dialogue scenes. The show doesn't always cut to whoever is speaking. Sometimes it holds on Sam while someone else talks, letting you watch his face react. That's such a good choice because it keeps the story anchored in his experience. Even when someone else is delivering information, the real drama is what that information does to him. His eyes narrow. His mouth tightens. His gaze drops like he's calculating risk. Those are the beats that make scenes feel alive. And because we're on Bongo Gaming and we're keeping it real, I'll admit I got weirdly protective of Sam. There were moments where I wanted him to quit, not because it would solve the plot, but because I wanted him to choose himself. That's how you know the show is doing its job. It made me care about the person, not just the story engine. Another rehook to keep you leaning in, the premise says, only Sam can protect the city. But what if that's not inherently good? What if concentrating power in one person is a disaster waiting to happen, even if the person is decent? The show hints at that ethical discomfort, and it's one of its most interesting tensions. Heroes are dangerous. Not because they are evil, but because systems start relying on them instead of fixing themselves. That's where the drama could get really bold. If it keeps pushing into the idea that Sam's heroism is a symptom of institutional failure, failure to handle history responsibly, failure to protect the public transparently, then this becomes more than a supernatural thriller. It becomes a critique of how societies outsource safety to the invisible. Now, I'm going to keep going until I hit a natural stopping point, because there's still more to explore in how the show's emotional language evolves, especially as Sam's isolation sharpens and the museum's secrets start feeling less like a puzzle and more like a trap, and the way the drama uses repeated sensory motifs, glass, footsteps, tapping, hums, locked doors, turns into a kind of hypnosis where you start anticipating dread before it arrives, which is exactly what good suspense does, and it's also where you can feel the creators playing a longer game with the idea of restoration, because Sam's initial act of fixing the statue is like the first domino, and everything after that feels like the world trying to restore an old balance that modern life forgot existed, and Sam is stuck in the middle of that restoration like a human wedge, trying to keep two eras from snapping together and crushing everyone in between, and the show keeps stressing that wedge position by putting him in frames where he's literally between things, between doors, between cases, between light and dark, until you start to realize that the real horror isn't that artifacts are waking up, it's that the past never stopped being present, it just needed one tired night shift guard to touch the wrong crack and give it a way back in, and once you start seeing the story that way, a bunch of smaller choices snap into focus. Like why the show keeps returning to Sam's hands. Not in a, look at the cool power, way. In a, hands are tools, way. A guard's hands hold keys, hold flashlights, sign forms, open doors, close doors, sometimes shove someone back when they are trespassing. Hands are practical. Hands are employed. So when the power attaches itself to Sam through an act of repair, it's almost like the museum is saying, I don't care about your dreams. I care about your usefulness. And that's chilling, because it frames destiny as something that exploits labor. What makes that exploitation hit harder is the way Sam tries to keep his life stitched together around it. The show doesn't turn him into a full-time supernatural warrior who suddenly has nothing else going on. It keeps pulling him back to ordinary obligations. He still has to show up. Still has to smile at the wrong people. Still has to act normal when his nerves are screaming. And the more he has to pretend, the more you feel that secret identity isn't a mask he puts on. It's a mask that's glued to his face. Let me lean into the relationship dynamics a bit, because even though the premise is very, one man versus ancient evil, the drama's emotional heat comes from the people orbiting him. Not because they are all richly detailed side plots, again, the show is pretty restrained, but because each person becomes a different kind of risk. There's the risk of being reported. The risk of being questioned. The risk of being seen at the wrong moment. The risk of someone noticing your lies and deciding you're unsafe. And the most painful risk is the simplest one, the risk of disappointing someone who only knows the version of you that existed before the museum changed you. This is where the writing gets sneaky good. It uses everyday conversations as traps. A coworker asks, "You good?" and Sam has to answer in a way that won't invite follow-up. A superior asks about an incident, and Sam has to choose between telling the truth and keeping his job. Someone makes a casual joke, and Sam laughs a bit late because his brain is somewhere else. These aren't plot twists. They are pressure tests. And the show keeps stacking them until you can practically hear Sam's self-control creaking. Here's the question I kept coming back to in this final stretch of the season. Is the biggest danger the artifacts, or the fact that Sam is being forced to become a liar? Because the longer he keeps the secret, the more his relationships become performative. And performative relationships are brittle. They break catastrophically. The show doesn't need to show a big breakup or a dramatic confession to make that tension feel real. It's there in the pauses, in the swallowed words, in the way Sam's eyes dart toward exits during conversations like he's already planning his escape. And speaking of exits, the show is obsessed with them. It keeps framing Sam with doorways behind him, with hallways stretching away, with windows that reflect rather than reveal. Even outside the museum, you'll get shots where Sam is separated from the world by something transparent, glass, a fence, a screen, a reflection. The visual language keeps saying, he's here, but he's not fully here. That's loneliness rendered in architecture. Now, I want to talk about the museum as an institution again, but more specifically as a mood. The show nails a very particular tension. The museum is public in the daytime and private at night, and those two identities don't match. In the day, it's curated, educational, safe. At night, it's raw, ancient, predatory. That split makes it the perfect setting for a secret hero story because Sam is also split. He has a daytime self, even if he's sleeping through daylight, you know what I mean, and a night self who deals with the truth. And the drama keeps pushing those two selves toward collision. It's like watching someone try to keep two lives from touching, knowing that eventually they will. There's a late-game escalation, still keeping it vague, that changes how you read the museum's rules. The show starts making it clear that the threats aren't simply random awakenings. There's a sense of intention, like something is testing Sam. Not just attacking him, but probing him. seeing what he'll do, seeing what he won't do. And that's where the drama becomes more psychologically intense. Because it turns the museum into a judge. Not a teacher. A judge. The actor playing Sam sells this shift with one specific thing: his gaze becomes more confrontational. Early on, he looks at the museum like it's a job site. Later, he looks at it like it's an enemy he can't afford to underestimate. There's a scene where he stands still and just looks, really looks, into a dark corridor, and you can tell he's not just scared anymore. He's angry. But it's a quiet anger. The kind you get when you realize something has been using you. That's a powerful moment because it marks the point where Sam stops being purely reactive and starts becoming morally engaged. He's not just surviving, he's resisting. And that resistance is where the drama's theme of repair gets complicated in a way I loved. Because repair sounds gentle. It sounds positive. Fix the statue, fix the problem, fix the past, fix the boundary. But what if the thing that needs fixing can't be fixed without breaking something else? What if repair is just another word for control? The show starts flirting with the idea that restoration can be violent. That preserving history can require erasing parts of it. And suddenly Sam's power doesn't feel like he can fix things. It feels like he can enforce an order. That's a much more morally messy reading, and it's way more interesting than a clean superhero arc. Here's a rehook that genuinely changed how I watched the last few episodes. What if Sam's anonymity isn't just protecting him from the world? What if it's protecting the world from him? Because if power is unstable, if it changes you, if it corrupts you even a little, then keeping that power hidden isn't purely heroic. It's containment. And the show's tone, especially in quieter scenes, suggests it's aware of that possibility. Let me give you another cinematic mini-scene that hit me in the chest, because it's not even the biggest event of the story, but it's one of the most emotionally honest. Sam is alone in a security room, lit by monitors, that cold bluish glow making his skin look almost grey. There's a fan rattling somewhere, slightly off rhythm, like a heartbeat with anxiety. He's staring at the screens, but you can tell he's not really seeing them. He's thinking. He's tired in a way that feels beyond sleep. And then his hand goes to his uniform, not in a heroic gesture, more like he's checking that he's still himself under it. He exhales, and it's not relief. It's resignation. In that moment, the show doesn't need monsters. The monster is the job. The monster is the secret. The monster is the fact that tomorrow will come and he'll still be the only one who knows what's really happening. That scene lands because it's so human, and because the show has earned the right to be quiet with him. And this is where my own emotional confession comes in again, because I didn't expect to feel this kind of sadness from a supernatural action-leaning premise. But I did. I felt it in my throat sometimes. That particular ache of being responsible for something nobody acknowledges. I've had tiny versions of that in real life, being the one who notices a problem, who fixes it, who stays late, who takes the hit, without getting credit, without getting help. Watching Sam live that at mythic scale made it weirdly cathartic and weirdly painful. Like the show was validating a kind of invisible exhaustion people carry around every day. Now, if you're watching as a newcomer, you might be thinking, okay, but is it fun? And yes, it is fun in the way a well-made suspense drama is fun. It's fun because it keeps you alert. It's fun because it makes objects feel dangerous. It's fun because it keeps pulling the rug out from under Sam's expectations. But it's not goofy fun. It's not, turn your brain off. It's more like that fun where you find yourself leaning forward, pausing to listen to a sound cue, rewinding a shot because you think you saw something in the corner. It's participatory. And the show invites that participation through its visual composition. It loves negative space. It loves frames where there's too much empty room behind Sam. It loves letting you scan the background like a paranoid person. And because it does it consistently, you start doing it automatically. You become part of the tension machinery. That's good direction. There's also an interesting push in the late stretch where the museum's ancient quality starts feeling less like oldness and more like timelessness. Like the secret isn't just historical. It's ongoing. It's present tense. The show uses that feeling to suggest that the past isn't behind us, it's beneath us. It's under the floorboards of modern life. And Sam's just the guy who heard the floor creak. Let's talk about dialogue texture again, because this show's dialogue is rarely flashy, but it's purposeful. The best lines are still the ones that sound like they could be said by a real person under stress. Short. Practical. Sometimes a little rude. Sometimes defensive. You don't get many elegant speeches about destiny. You get someone asking questions that sound like a worker asking about a broken machine. What is this? Why is this happening? How do I stop it? That's the right voice for this protagonist. It keeps the story grounded. When the show does get more poetic, usually through someone implying the scale of the secret, it tends to do it sparingly. And I appreciate that, because too much grand language would break the spell. The whole point is that this is an ordinary man being pulled into extraordinary stakes. If everyone around him started speaking like an oracle, the world would feel staged. Instead, even the people who seem to know more often speak in cautious, clipped phrases, like they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. That fear suggests the secret has teeth. Here's a small, self-aware laugh I had. There's something almost absurdly unfair about Sam being expected to protect a city from ancient threats, while also being expected to not make any noise, not cause any trouble, not freak anyone out, not violate protocol, not get overtime, not mess up the museum's reputation. It's like being told, save everyone, but please do it quietly and don't inconvenience management. If that doesn't sound like real life, again, congratulations. Now, I want to give you my most respectful critique of the show's last leg. It sometimes underutilizes the emotional fallout on the people around Sam. Because we're mostly locked into Sam's perspective, and because the show is committed to secrecy, there are moments where the world feels a little too calm considering the scale of threat implied. I get why they do it. They want the mystery. They want the tension of hidden danger. But occasionally I wanted the show to let the broader social temperature rise more visibly. Not full panic, not disaster movie mode, but just more friction. More sense that the city is beginning to feel the museum's shadow. That said, I also think the show is deliberately avoiding spectacle because it knows the heart of the story isn't crowds screaming in the streets. The heart is one exhausted guard trying to keep a lid on something too old to negotiate with. So I'm torn. The restraint is a virtue, but it also keeps certain emotional consequences more contained than they might realistically be. If the next season, or the next arc, expands the ripple effects, that would be the perfect evolution. Because right now, the show is almost like a pressure cooker. It's sealed. You feel the heat. You hear the hiss. You're waiting for steam to escape. And that waiting is part of the tension. If they let too much steam out too early, it wouldn't feel as tight. Here's another rehook. What if the museum's secret was never meant to stay hidden forever? What if it was always going to resurface, and Sam just happened to be the person on duty when the clock ran out? That's a haunting idea because it makes Sam less like a chosen hero and more like a witness, someone who got caught at the intersection of cycles larger than him. The show's tone supports that interpretation, and it adds a layer of tragedy. Now, thematically, the show is doing something that I think is pretty bold for a story that could have been simple. It's questioning the morality of guardianship. When you guard something, you're making a claim. This should remain as it is. This should remain contained. But what if containment is unjust? What if the secret was hidden for reasons that aren't purely protective? The show hints at that moral complexity without handing you a neat answer. And that's why I keep calling it more than a spooky superhero origin. It's interrogating the premise as it uses it. And Sam's arc, because of that, becomes less about learning to use power, and more about learning what to do with responsibility. Those aren't the same story. Learning power is training. Learning responsibility is moral growth. It's deciding what kind of person you want to be when nobody can check you. There's a subtle shift in the late episodes where Sam starts making proactive choices. Again, I'm not going to give you the specifics. But you can feel the difference. Earlier, he reacts to danger. Later, he anticipates it. And the show frames those proactive moments with a different energy. The camera is a little steadier. The cuts are a little cleaner. The score is less jittery. It's like the show is saying, he's not just being dragged anymore. He's walking. Not confidently, not joyfully, but with intention. That's a satisfying arc movement. Now, I know you asked me to finish the script, and I'm getting there emotionally, but I'm not going to rush the landing because this drama doesn't rush its emotional truths, and it would feel wrong for me to suddenly sprint to a verdict without honoring the slow build. So let me talk about what I think the show's secret sauce is. Beyond the premise, it has taste. It knows what not to show. It knows when to let a sound do the work. It knows when to hold a shot. It knows that fear isn't just a monster, it's anticipation. It knows that loneliness is scarier than gore. And it knows that the best supernatural stories are really about human vulnerability wearing a fantasy costume. And I can't overstate how much I appreciate the show's commitment to making the museum feel tactile. You can almost feel the temperature in those rooms. You can feel the dryness of old air. You can feel the slight stickiness of varnished wood. That sensory specificity makes the supernatural feel physically present. When an artifact threatens, it doesn't feel like magic pixels. It feels like the room itself has turned against you. Also, the show is very good at making time feel strange. Night shift time already feels warped, hours stretch, minutes crawl, and the drama uses that warp. Scenes at night feel longer, like they're happening outside normal time. Day scenes, when they occur, feel too quick, like they're slipping through Sam's fingers. That time distortion supports the theme that Sam is living a different life than everyone else, on a different clock. Here's my biggest surprise takeaway: this drama is romantic about duty without glorifying it. It respects the idea of showing up. It respects the quiet worker who keeps things safe. But it also mourns what that duty takes from you. It doesn't pretend the cost is noble and therefore fine. It shows the cost as cost. And I think that's why I loved it. Yes, loved. Because it's not just entertaining. It feels like it's looking at a kind of person who rarely gets to be the mythic center of a story, the guard, the night worker, the invisible protector, and it's saying, you matter enough to be the hero of something big. That's emotionally potent. Now, before I give you my final verdict, I want to underline one more contrarian thought. A lot of viewers will watch this and focus on the fantasy mechanics, what the power does, what the artifacts are, what the ancient secret might be. All valid. But I think the show's most radical move is making anonymity the defining trait of heroism. In most hero stories, anonymity is a gimmick. Here, it's a wound. It's the source of the show's sadness. And it's also its critique: society depends on unseen people and then forgets they exist. The show makes that dynamic literal, supernatural, and emotionally legible. If Satpam Museum Dengan Kekuatan Rahasia ever does a big, flashy reveal moment later on, it'll only matter because of how deeply it's invested in that anonymity as pain. That's why the quiet scenes matter. They are not filler. They are the emotional groundwork that makes any later payoff hurt in the right way. So where do I land on it, as a viewer with taste and a low tolerance for empty hype? I think this is one of those dramas that knows exactly what it wants to be. It's a supernatural thriller with horror atmosphere, yes. But it's also a worker's tragedy, a story about history refusing to stay behind glass, and a character study of a man being remade by responsibility. It's not perfect. The occasional exposition delivery can feel a bit too plot-forward, and a few effects moments can look slightly uneven. The middle stretch can simmer so long that some people will want a bigger jolt. But the mood is so strong, the lead performance is so grounded, and the thematic undercurrent is so sincere that I didn't just enjoy it. I trusted it. Who is this for? If you like slow burn tension, eerie spaces, and protagonists who feel like actual human beings instead of quip machines, you're going to eat. If you've ever been pulled toward stories like Ordinary Person becomes the only line of defense, but you want it with more melancholy and less bravado, this will hit. If you like your supernatural with atmosphere first and lore second, you're in the right museum. Who might want to skip? If you need constant action, if you get impatient with ambiguity, if you want every rule of the power explained quickly and cleanly, you might find yourself tapping your foot. This show prefers dread to adrenaline. It prefers tension to fireworks. And it's unapologetic about that. If you watched it too, tell me the moment that made you sit up. Not the biggest scare. The moment that made you feel the weight of it. Drop it in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious what stuck to other people's ribs the way certain scenes stuck to mine. And if you want more reviews like this on Bongo Gaming, hit subscribe and stick around. I'll keep it honest, I'll keep it human, and I'll keep calling out the stuff that actually matters. Some shows end and you forget them by lunch. This one ends and you find yourself listening to your own hallway at night, wondering what the quiet is hiding.